guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I just wanted to do something at least I find interesting, which is comparing a book to the movie adaptation. For this first video, I read the book and watched the movie of Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. This is the story of Louis Zamperini, who was an Olympic runner, but also enlisted into the armed forces when World War II broke out, and he was shot down in a plane and survived that to be picked up by Japanese military, and he was in a POW camp until the end of the war. And this is his story of, basically it's his life. It's his life in the POW camp, it's his life with the other soldiers, and the book does go into the sort of the end of his life, not up until his death because that book was published before he died, but it also does talk about his life after the war. That's the main gist of the story. I have three main criteria that I sort of want to use to discuss both the film and the movie, and just talking about their differences and which one overall I think is worth your time. The first criteria I'm going to use is just the overall quality of adaptation. Do I think that the book was adapted to a movie well or not? And for this one, definitely yes. The book is much more in depth than the movie is or really could ever be. There are so many more examples and instances of what he went through in the POW camps. Also, the length of time spent on the raft in the middle of the ocean, waiting for rescue. There's just so much more like meat in the book where you can kind of take your time to go through all of those, which you really never can within the film. And I don't think that's a negative of the adaptation. I actually think that's a strength, because if you try to put everything in, it's too bogged down, in my opinion. So I think the adaptation is very well done. The second criteria that I'm using is just the overall emotional response. Did I feel more connected to the people, in this case a nonfiction story, so the actual people in the book more than the movie, or vice versa? And for this one's tricky because the movie is very emotional. I don't think you can watch this without feeling something, because if you can, then I guess you may be a robot? I don't know. I mean, it's very heartbreaking. It's very hard to watch those scenes without, I don't know, like, honestly, you're wincing through a lot of the movie. It is like kind of watching through your fingers because it's just so brutal that anybody could go through, let alone surviving a plane crash, staying in a raft in the middle of the ocean with no food and no water for a lot of days, and then surviving the torture of being in a prisoner of war camp. So watching the movie, you definitely feel for Louis because it's following his story, but also the other men that he is with. And you also feel a decent amount of anger toward the Japanese military in this instance, just the brutality of war. And so yes, but there's also a good amount of hope that you feel within the movie, for especially in the beginning of the movie during the Olympic part of Louis' journey with his running and just his family life and that kind of thing. So the movie does a very good job of invoking emotion. But I will say I cried a lot during the book. There's the highest highs within the book, and the lowest lows I think are even more dramatic within the text. So emotionally, I felt very, very connected to Louis in the book. I think particularly the end part, like after the war, because the movie does not really go into much description of his life after the war. It's really just, you know, those end screens where, you know, Louis did this or Pete did this or whatever characters they're kind of discussing. So it's really just like a one sentence thing, which really does not encapsulate all of Louis' life after the war, particularly when you're talking POWs. You're talking serious PTSD, seriously difficult transition back to civilian life. And the book does a very good job talking about the struggles that Louis has, but not just Louis, some of the other people. And it also follows the one main captor that Louis deals with, and they call him the Bird. It's not really a spoiler, you can see it in the previews. It's one particular guard. Well, he's in the POW camp, so they do follow his life after the war as well, and that's super interesting. So I think that's one big difference, is just there's so much more in the book than you can get in there, but emotionally I felt very invested in both, and I think maybe even more in the book than the movie. And my last criteria is just overall enjoyment. I can look at a book and a movie as two very different things, even if it's an adaptation of one. I think it's okay for them to leave parts out. It's okay for them to be different. And honestly, it's okay for filmmakers to take liberties with the source material. That doesn't bother me very much. So overall enjoyment, I think both of these things, the movie and the book, are very, very, very good. I consumed that book within a day. I listened to the audiobook, and I think it was one of those things where I just could not put it down. I just wanted to get back to it. I wanted to listen to it. I was in the car, wherever I was when I was listening to it, and I just could not stop. I was so ingrained. I wanted to know what happened to Louis, and I think that's such a strength of someone who can write nonfiction, and it's that compelling. I'm a nerd. I've talked about that before. I love history, and particularly war stories. So, I mean, I may be just more impactful to someone like me, but that is really, really good. I know the same author also wrote Seabiscuit, which I have not seen the movie and I've not read the book, so maybe I will try that in a later one just to see if it's as interesting, because I'm not a person who enjoys sports really in the least. So maybe I will see if that one feels as interesting and engaging as I thought Unbroken was. In sum, I think that both the book and the movie are very, very good, and they are both worth anyone's time. If you do not particularly like war stories, but beyond that, maybe the violence, and neither of them may be good for you. The movie may be even worse just because you're watching it, whereas reading, you could skim over some of the worst parts, even though that's pretty much the whole story, is the trials that Louis went through to survive the war. So that, take that into account. There is some serious abuse. There is serious torture and starvation and humiliation and any other terrible, terrible thing you can think of in the realm of war. It is in this story, or at least can handle them emotionally. Then I think you should definitely watch the movie, but check out that book. It is so, so, so good. And I think it's worth the read for sure. And hopefully I will do another one of these in the future. I definitely watch a lot of movies and I read a lot of books, so works for me. Until then, I'll see you later. Bye.